we start with the presentation. We start with the topic of discussion. Today, the topic of discussion is reproductive and child health, and this is the fourth class in series. Usually, we used to have the fourth and fifth parts of RCH in two different classes, but now for this session, we have clubbed the two classes and we'll try to cover the two in a duration of about 1 to 1.5 hours. So we'll be reading about the important points and important topics in RCH 4 and 5 over here, and then if you have some other queries or doubts, you can contact me later regarding the topics and the doubts in the topic. So you have already gone through the three series of lectures on RCH, and RCH stands for Reproductive and Child Health Program, which has been modified and rechristened into a new nomenclature as RMNCHA, which means Reproductive, Maternal and Newborn Care and Adolescent Health Program. Since this encompasses a complete life cycle approach, which must have been discussed in the previous classes, about the life cycle approach, continuum of care, and decentralized planning that form an important part of the reproductive and child health program in the initial few sessions. So here we will talk about the contents that will be covered in this lecture would be breastfeeding, which is a very important topic when we if you look onto the exam perspective. As per the exam, this is a very important topic both for the viva and the theory exam. Lactation management, fertility indicators, a long question is expected out of this topic. Then maternal mortality and the factors affecting maternal mortality, factors affecting under 5 child health, programmatic interventions. This is again a very important long question which you might get in the exam. Polio eradication efforts and sustenance of efforts towards maintenance of eradication, and the newer initiatives under the program. So this is slightly a longer class, but I have tried to concise it and make it smaller for you guys so that you can imbibe whatever is being talked about. But if you feel that somewhere you are facing a lot of difficulty in understanding, you can stop me right there. We can take a break of 5 minutes and then continue the class again. So first topic would be breastfeeding, and this is a very important topic because you will go through breastfeeding and related problems and management in pediatrics also. And here we'll talk about how breastfeeding is an important factor in the growing up or in the nutritional health of a newborn baby and the mother. How is it beneficial for the entire family, and how effective breastfeeding has to be done for the good health of the baby and the mother. So if you go by the WHO's importance of breastfeeding in 2002, WHO said that it is an unequaled way of providing ideal food for the health, growth and development of infants, and is also an integral. So it's not only beneficial to the infant, but is also an integral part of the reproductive process with important implications for the health of the mothers. So this is a best way for a baby's growth, and also as an mandatory part, an integral part of the reproductive process, and beneficial to the mothers. However, it is important that proper positioning of the baby on the breast will always ensure adequate latching on. Latching on is the term, scientific term, which is used for attaching the baby to the mother's breast, and subsequently how the baby latches onto the breast will depend upon the adequacy of breastfeeding, adequacy in terms of weight gain, adequacy in terms of nutritional requirements, and adequacy in terms of proper growth of the baby. Human milk is human specific and contains the nutrients that are essential for proper growth and development of the newborn. So there is no replacement of human milk, there is no replacement of breast milk, neither formula feeds, no cow, buffalo, goat, or any other kind of milk would supplement to or be as good as the mother's milk for the newborn baby. So no milk, no food, no other drink like water, honey, good tea, or animal powdered milk, tea, or glucose should be given to a baby. These are all, if fed to a baby before initiation of breastfeeding, are called as pre-lacteal feeds. As the name suggests, pre means before, Lacteal means before the lactation has been commenced. If you give anything, that is called as a pre-lacteal feed, and all the pre-lacteal feeds are harmful in two ways. One is if you try to give honey or gutti or water or a powdered or animal milk to the baby immediately after the delivery, it might lead to diarrhea, because one, the baby comes out from a very sterile environment, and if you try to give something which comes from an external environment and which is handled by unhygienic practices and hands, can lead to infections, specifically diarrheas. All the more, if you try to give pre-lacteal feeds, the babies would get used to a simpler way of satiety of hunger, and thereby would not be able to, would not like to suckle, and there would be difficulty in initiation of breastfeeding, because breastfeeding is an active process where the baby has to put in a lot of effort to take the milk out of mother's breast. So pre-lacteal feeds are always harmful for the baby. Hence, we strongly discourage any pre-lacteal feed in the baby, and baby should always be breastfed immediately after the birth, as early as possible, and as soon as the mother is comfortable after the delivery of the baby and is ready to feed the baby on breast. So the breast milk can, of course, directly be given to the baby. The baby can immediately suckle on the breast milk, but it can also be stored and utilized later in the day whenever required, in case the mother is working or is separated from the baby for some reason. There are no absolute contraindications for breastfeeding. There could be relative contraindications, but absolute contraindications are none. And any condition, if the baby is under suitable protective measures, under suitable precautions, the baby can be breastfed on the mother. They have mother's milk, mother's breast, weighing the pros and cons of the complications that can occur by not feeding the baby on breast or giving the top feeds. So we celebrate World Breastfeeding Week every year from 1st to 7th August, where during this week, the main aim, the major purpose is to raise the awareness of the general community about the advantages of breastfeeding, and strongly discourage top feeds and pre-lacteal feeds is the major aim of celebration of World Breastfeeding Week every year from 1st to 7th August. And during this week, we have all special programs, community-based programs that are being run by the ASHAs, the ANMs, and the community link workers to raise the awareness of the people and motivate the mothers to breastfeed their babies. So when I said that a breast milk, a baby is the most suitable food for the baby, human baby, is the mother's breast milk and none other, we need to support that statement with an evidence which says that how, if this slide, if we compare the kinds of milk easily and readily available for the baby, that is buffalo cow and goat milk, as compared to the human milk, we would realize that in terms of energy, the buffalo milk is almost 117 kilocalories, full cream buffalo milk per 100 ml of energy. And if you compare it to the cow and goat and human milk, you see in terms of total calories, overall calories, only the goat milk, the cow milk is close to the human milk, which is almost 65 kilocalories per 100 grams or 100 ml of milk. However, when we see the other fats, that is the fat, protein, lactose, calcium, they all pose as a high solute load on the baby's gut and kidneys. Thereby, buffalo milk is not at all suitable for the baby that should be given. So the normal practice is that to bring it close to the human milk in terms of calorie, water is added to the buffalo milk to bring the calories equivalent to the human milk. So if you add water to buffalo milk, the calories might be equal, but the dilution would be in a manner that vitamin C goes down as compared to human milk. The proteins would go down, the fats would go down, the lactose is already low, and then you need to add some sugar. So to bring it equal to human milk, you need to add sugar to buffalo milk and add some water, which is called as humanization of milk. But that would dilute the other components of the milk, and thereby doesn't leave it suitable for the consumption of a human baby. Looking on to the cow milk, comparing to the human milk, and you see that in terms of calorie, cow milk is the most suitable milk in terms of energy per 100 ml, whereas the fat is quite high in cow milk as compared to human milk. The proteins are almost 3 times as compared to human milk. The lactose is very less. The calcium is almost 5 to 6 times as compared to human milk, which means that the cow milk, the solutes are also less, and the available sugar which is required for the baby to be active and energetic is less in cow milk as compared to the human milk. So hence I prove that human milk is the best milk available for the human baby for the growth and development, with a ready available sugar and less solute load on the baby's gut and the renal systems. So if we broadly talk about the benefits of breastfeeding, it is not only the baby but the mother is also benefited by breastfeeding. And let's see how. So the advantages of breastfeeding in a baby is that it's a safe and a clean, hygienic, cheap and nutritious food material, which has anti-infective property. We all know that it is a very rich source of IgA and IgG, easily digested. It is, if we go by the hormones, if we go by physiology of, okay, I found this on the web through, if we go by the physiology of breastfeeding, we would realize that oxytocin is the hormone that is responsible for love and infatuation and bonding, and more oxytocin is required for the breast milk injection. So the more a mother breastfeeds the baby, it would promote bonding between the baby and the mother. Since I said that it is a method where an active intervention by the baby is required, so teeth and jaws of the baby become stronger, they develop well by suckling. If you go back to the previous slide, you will realize that the minerals and the proteins and the fats that are the components of sphingomyelin and the myelin sheath are the phospholipids and glycoproteins. So these phospholipids, they are helpful in increasing the neuronal responses, neuronal reflexes, and thereby help in increasing the intelligence quotient of the baby. So IQ is higher in children who are breastfed as compared to children who are on top feeds or who've been top fed. And there are scientific evidences to prove that the intelligence quotient of the children, of the babies who are breastfed right from the time of birth, are at least 8 points higher than the children who have not been breastfed or who've been on top feeds right from the time of birth. For the mother, it is very important because I told you that this is again oxytocin release. So oxytocin release will help in contraction of uterus, thereby decreasing the chances of postpartum hemorrhage. And of course, secondary to postpartum hemorrhage, anemia would also be decreased. And also it prevents the occurrence of estrogen dependent cancers like cancer ovary and breast cancers. So mothers who have breastfed their babies for longer have a decreased chances of ovarian and breast cancers, postpartum hemorrhage, and thereby anemia. So what is the recommendation? The recommendation is early initiation of breastfeeding and not within half an hour of the normal delivery and not later than 4 hours in cases of cesarean section. So early initiation of breastfeeding should be done in all the children as early as possible and not later than half an hour in cases of normal delivery. And exclusive breastfeeding has to be done for first 6 months of life. So exclusive breastfeeding means nothing but mother's milk has to be given to the baby, which includes no water, no top milk, no top feeds to be given to the baby for initial 6 months of life. So coming on to the complementary feeding. So after 6 months, what are you supposed to do for the baby at the age of 6 months? Since the breast milk is insufficient to meet the additional requirements of the baby in terms of calories, in terms of proteins, and in terms of nutrients, so additional food has to be added or introduced to the diet of the baby very gradually in smaller amounts. And this could be in the form of, preferably in the form of the food that is being consumed by the family itself, maybe in a softer consistency. So soft cooked mashed vegetables and fruits to be given initially. So liquid followed by solid, semi-solid, and followed by solid. So by the age of 1 year, almost the child should be able to consume the same food that is being consumed by the family. The staple food that is being consumed by the family has to be consumed by the baby by the time the baby is already 1 year of age. So the mother is, no Indian woman can be inadequate in terms of breast milk secretion. So even a poor Indian woman who was herself malnourished has a capacity to secrete approximately 400 to 600 ml of breast milk per day when she is at the peak of her lactation. So the mother is never inadequate. However, the inadequacy is in the thoughts, because it's a uh, the breastfeeding is a process, and it's a lactation that is due to the orchestra of hormones that play from the pituitary to the hypothalamus and acts locally on the nipples and breast for the baby to suckle and for the mother to eject the milk. So the energy is approximately 65 kilocalories per 100 ml, as we've discussed in the previous slide, with a good protein content of 1.1 gram per 100 ml. And the specific thing about this protein is that it is nutritionally superior to what is available in the other sources of milk, because this is an easily digestible protein as per the gut of the baby. The capacity of the gut of the baby to digest the protein is good enough to digest the protein that is present in mother's milk. So breast milk has to be continued till 2 years at least, along with the complementary feeding. So complementary feeding or weaning is not a process of weaning the baby off the breastfeed, but it is just to supplement the additional foods required, which since at this age the breast milk becomes insufficient to meet the requirements of the baby, and the breast milk has to be continued till 2 years or beyond, and as long as the mother is comfortable and can keep on continuing the breastfeeding of the baby. So why do we say that breastfeeding is not a process in isolation? It is lactation, which is a complete process, because I said that it is the nutrition of the woman, the psyche of the woman, the mental health of the woman, the hormones of the woman. They all have an interplay. All these factors interplay to lead to a successful lactation, and thereby to manage lactation is a tedious process which should begin right from the antenatal period of the woman. So when should you start counseling the woman about early breastfeeding, continued breastfeeding, weaning, exclusive breastfeeding? It should be right from the first trimester of pregnancy. So a woman has to be adequately trained, taught, and talked about the process of lactation and thereby breastfeeding right from the first trimester of pregnancy. First of all, in the form of extra nutrition. So a woman should be given an extra caloric requirement of 350 kilocalories per day and 23 grams of protein per day right from the first trimester of pregnancy. She has to be counseled that she has to be a mother who will have to be breastfeeding the baby exclusively for 6 months and should be starting immediately after the delivery of the baby. So she has to be psychologically accustomed and counseled to be a lactating mother. So this psyche of the woman will help in the adequate functioning of the hormones for production of milk, for ejection of milk, and thereby successful breastfeeding. During the lactation, initial 6 months, the mother should be given an extra calorie requirement of 600 kilocalories per day with the 19 grams of protein per day extra. And during after 6 months of the lactation period, or when the baby is 6 months of age, an additional calorie requirement of 520 kilocalories is to be given, and along with extra 13 gram of protein per day to the pre-pregnancy requirement of the mother. So this over and above this calorie requirement and the protein requirement is over and above the requirement of the woman during the pre-pregnant phase. So of course, iron folic acid supplementation has its own importance because it's a physically tedious process, and the iron and folic acid supplementation has to be given. It should be commenced if you remember your previous classes or on RM and CHA, you know that the iron has to be given to a woman during the second and third trimester for prophylaxis, and then for the treatment or therapeutic iron as if the woman requires at all. And this iron folic acid supplementation has to spill over for initial 6 months of age after the woman delivers the baby. So this iron folate supplementation will not only compensate for the losses of the blood during delivery, but will also restore the marrow iron stores for the further make up for the iron blood losses and the iron losses. So when I say the extra requirement of lactating mother in terms of in during the antenatal period, during the postnatal period, the diet in terms of calorie and protein has to be a balanced diet with more of cereal and pulses and green leafy vegetables, one seasonal fruit added a day, lots of fluids and milk and buttermilk to be added to their diet, good protein and good fats like egg, meat and fish, and of course energy dense foods like ghee, oil and sugar. Sometimes the traditional preparations like the laddu panjiri are also calorie dense or energy dense foods that need to be given to improve the nutrition of the woman on the whole. So when you have to plan the diet for a lactating mother or an antenatal woman in terms of extra calories and extra proteins required, you should know that what you are supposed to give in the diet and what is the requirement of the woman, which is a complete holistic extra diet added in terms of a complete diet and not just supplemented in terms of sugar, flour, or in terms of dry fruits or in terms of ghee, which is a traditional concept amongst the common people, that these are the things that need to be given to the woman during lactation or during pregnancy to compensate for the increased requirement of calories and proteins. So now when I say that lactation is a process, how do we ensure an optimal breastfeeding? We have to make sure that the skin to skin contact between the infant and mothers help to maintain the body temperature. So what happens when the skin of the baby comes in contact with the skin of the mother? One, the hypoglycemia is avoided. So the deaths of the baby due to hypoglycemia, the possibility is lowered. The second thing is the touch of the baby to the mother's skin will stimulate the hypothalamus and will stimulate the secretion of prolactin hormone, and prolactin hormone will lead to increase in secretion of milk with oxytocin, which will help in ejection of milk. So enhancing oxytocin release and beneficial nutrition with intake of colostrum. So as early as possible, the mother should come in contact with the baby, or the baby should be kept on the body of the mother or come into contact with the mother's body, put to the breast immediately after delivery, even before the placenta is out, to ensure that there is no hypoglycemia and no hypothermia, and thereby the oxytocin release is faster, which can lead to ejection of milk immediately after delivery. And oxytocin also plays a role in expulsion of placenta by leading to contractions of the uterus. So once the oxytocin is released, the mother and baby comes in contact with each other. This oxytocin will also lead to increase in placenta, fastening of the expulsion of placenta along with the ejection of milk, and thereby decreasing the possibility of retained placenta, postpartum hemorrhage, and anemia post-deliveries. The second important thing is that as early as possible, if you are able to establish the breastfeeding, it would always be better. Again, as early as possible means as soon as the baby is delivered, baby is out of the mother's womb, baby should be kept on the baby mother's body, should be immediately able to put to suckle even before the baby is wiped clean. Uh, uh, you keep the baby in a warm towel and put the baby on the mother's body, and thereby the breastfeeding should be immediately started. The physicians and the healthcare professionals should observe at least one feeding session and ensure that this is done properly. The breast milk is produced before the baby is discharged from the hospital. An early follow-up after leaving the hospital is required, which is done by the community health workers or the ASHAs and ANMs. So what is an effective breastfeeding? When do we say that the breastfeeding is effective or adequate? The baby should be fed at least 8 to 12 times a day. The breastfeeding on demand is must. The baby should ask for, if the baby is a healthy baby, not a low birth weight baby, no, not a premature baby, the baby should feed on demand. The baby should cry for the milk, and then the baby should be put onto the breast. There should not be scheduled feeding, which is more recommended in cases of low birth weight babies, because sometimes the low birth weight babies may not be able to ask for milk, and then thereby the feeding on demand is always encouraged in cases of a fully grown, mature, healthy babies. So how do you see that the baby is effectively breastfeeding? There are intermittent episodes of rhythmic suckling with audible swallows while the baby is nursing. So while the baby is put out at the mother's breast, you should be able to hear rhythmic suckling with audible swallows. And the baby should be able to produce 6 to 8 minimum wet diapers in a 24-hour period once the baby's breastfeeding is established. Looking onto the bowel movements, if the baby is adequately being breastfed, there should be minimum 3 to 4 bowel movements every 24 hours, and the stool should be soft and yellowish after day 3. And since in the initial 3 days, it's meconium, which is greenish or brownish in color. And after the baby is adequately breastfed, the bowel movements and the color of the stool changes. The consistency and color will change after the 3 days of the birth of the baby. Very important parameter is average daily weight gain of 15 to 30 grams. So for initial 7 days, the baby loses almost 10% of the baby weight, which is in the form of water. And then from the 7th day up till 10th day, the baby starts regaining the weight loss. So at the 10th day of life, the baby's weight will be approximately same what it was at the time of the birth. And after that, baby starts gaining 15 to 30 gram of weight every day if the baby is adequately being breastfed. So once we say that what is effective breastfeeding, we should also understand what are good signs of good attachment during the breastfeeding. And this attachment or good attachment is called as latching on. If you look onto this slide, there are two pictures. The first picture is the baby's mouth is wide open, and a major part of the nipple and some part of 2/3 part of the areola is already into the baby's mouth, and the nipple is placed somewhere in the oropharynx of the baby, right? This is called as deep latch on, which is the adequate method of latching on or putting a baby, attaching the baby to mother's breast. And the second part is the improper latching on, improper attachment, where the baby's mouth is closed and the nipple is held between the jaws of the baby. The jaw of the baby is the hardest part of the baby's body, and if the nipple is held between the jaws of the baby for a very long time, nipple is a very sensitive structure with lot of nerve endings, and this leads to a lot of pain in the mother and subsequent lactation failure, because first the baby has to suckle very hard, because in the areola, if you see, then let's go on to the first picture first. The jaw would be pressing on the areolar margins, and thereby the secretion of milk from the lactiferous sinuses would be better, which would be poorer in the second case, because in this case the baby is pressing with his jaws on the nervous tissue of the nipples, which will lead to less breast milk secretion and more of pain and sensitivity in the nipple. So if you see that a sign of good latching or a good attachment is more of areola is visible above the baby's upper lip. Mouth of the baby should be wide open, lower lip should be everted or curled outwards, and the baby's chin should be touching or almost touching the breast of the mother, and it should not be either pressing on the breast of the mother or convexly placed, that is chin away from the breast of the mother. That would press the nose with the breast milk, and you know, if the nose is pressed, then the baby will open the mouth for breathing and would not be able to feed on the breast, and there will be improper latching leading to poor feeding and more of hunger and poor weight gain. So the four good signs of good positioning during breastfeeding is the infant's head and body should be straight. Infant's body should be closely held to the mother's body. Head and body should be facing the breast, and the body of the baby, the back of the baby should be properly supported by the mother's arm. So a good latching is mandatory for effective breastfeeding and effective weight gain post breastfeeding in the baby. So what could be the barriers to effective breastfeeding? One is lack of confidence in the mother. So mother might feel that I'm inadequately feeding the baby, or the baby is inadequately being fed. Baby doesn't sleep well after feeding. The baby is usually up, is hungry, not gaining the weight. So lack of confidence in the mother is very effective barrier, very important barrier and needs to be taken care of by adequate counseling. Belief that the breast milk is not secreted sufficiently. As I told you, even a malnourished woman can sufficiently secrete the breast milk to meet the requirements of the baby. So this is again a very false belief that the breast milk can be inadequate or insufficient for the baby's requirements. Lack of adequate support system. As I just told you, that the baby for adequate feeding should be fed at least 8 to 12 times a day with at least 20 to 30 minutes of breastfeeding in one sitting on one breast. So which means that practically for 6 to 8 hours a day a woman has to sit with the baby, feeding the baby, then cleaning the baby, then baby passing the urine, stool, diaper changing and everything. So it's a huge task to take care of the baby. So believing that she doesn't have adequate support system to take care of the family when she's all engaged with the baby would also be an effective barrier to effective breastfeeding. Then if there's a history of previous breast surgery, so any anatomical or physiological problem with the breast feeding, could be history of any previous breast surgery, any breast engorgement, retraction or sore nipples, and retractile or inverted nipples could be any uh, anatomical problem that could lead to ineffective breastfeeding or barrier to effective breastfeeding. So we'll talk about them later. We come on to weaning or complementary feeding. Very important question. It's asked in your vivas. What do you understand by weaning or complementary feeding? So it's an extremely essential step from 6 months of age onwards for the baby. And the first food should be the staple cereal, whatever the family eats. If it's a rice eating belt, the rice should be given. If it's a wheat eating belt, then porridge, semolina, broken bean, atta, or round rice, ragi can be given. So to make it more energy dense, because a baby's stomach is small and the capacity is less. So to make it more energy dense or calorie dense, you can add sugar, ghee, jaggery oil, along with seasonal mashed foods or banana, papaya, chiku, apple, etc. can be given, which should be the first food that should be introduced to the baby. No cereals, no Cerelacs, no other formula feeds to be given to the baby. Homemade instant foods can be given, like 3 parts of cereal, 1 part of any pulse, and half part of grounded or till seeds. They can be roasted and grounded. They increase the nutritional value of the food if they are malted or germinating whole grain cereals. Pulses by drying and grinding can give a higher amount of energy in terms of calories. So there can be some pathological problems that can arise out of inadequate latching on or inadequate attachment of the baby to breast of the mother. So if you see the topmost picture, this will show what a normal breast should look like, where the nipple is it's a vascular tissue, neural tissue, which is usually everted. The nipples can be flat or inverted. Usually the flat nipples would become an everted nipple and a comfortable nipple for the baby to feed in by a simple maneuvering. This is a protractile structure which can improve in its anatomy just by simple pin rolling movement using an emollient during the pregnancy, because it's an elastic tissue. Another maneuver that can be used is you can advise the woman to use a simple Vaseline or an olive oil and use the index finger and the thumb and pin roll the nipples to bring them out of the areola. If that's a flat nipple, if it's an inverted nipple, you can use this maneuver by taking a syringe and cutting the front end of the syringe smoothened up. This can be applied gently using an emollient over the nipple, and slowly the plunger can be pulled back so that the nipple can be sucked within the syringe. This is a gentle procedure that has to be continued throughout the pregnancy so that the nipples become everted by the end of the pregnancy, and it's easy for the woman to feed on the baby to feed on the mother's milk. So counseling and confidence building is important. Skin to skin contact with the baby will also improve the anatomy of the breast. Management of this inverted nipple should start right within the antenatal period, and you should not wait for the delivery to occur and then only do the process to improve the anatomy of the breast. So I can see a raised hand. Lakshmi Soni has raised her hand. I'm not sure if she has any question. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat box. We can take the questions later. Are there any questions? So if there are no more questions, we go ahead. So this plastic syringe can be used, and this maneuvering, this processing should start within the antenatal period only to work upon the anatomy of the breast. So some common problems that can occur during lactation is sometimes it also happens that once the baby has been put onto the breast and the baby continues to suckle in the poor position, like I showed you in the previous slide, where the baby was poorly in the second picture, the poorly latching on was leading to, this is a poorly latched on baby, where the baby is suckling hard on the nipple, and the nipple are a sensitive nervous tissue, and this can lead to sore nipples because the baby is trying to press hard on the nipple and the milk ejection is poorer. So it can be a painful sore nipple, and thereby the painful sore nipple can, since it's a painful structure, mother will evade lactation. She would not like to feed the baby, and thereby once she stops feeding the baby, there'll be engorgement of breast. The engorged breast has milk pockets in it which become infected, and they cause mastitis, and these mastitis pockets will later have the bacterial infection and becomes the abscesses. So common problems would be sore nipples, where the baby will keep on suckling harder on the nipple and unable to have the milk as per the requirement, and thereby leading to soreness of nipples with engorged milk areas, milk pockets in the breast, leading to infection, mastitis, and breast abscess. So thereby the lactation failure would occur. So this was about the lactation management. The next part of the class would be about the fertility indicators. And if you look into this part of the class, this is again a very important class, and you find a lot of questions, specifically NRR, net reproduction rate, on GFR, gross fertility rates, and other fertility indicators, where you might find long questions coming directly from this part of the class. So we will talk about the fertility indicators, and to study any population, it's important to understand the fertility patterns, and to understand the fertility patterns, we need to have a common indicator to compare about the fertility indicators in a population. So what are the uses of measures of fertility? One is to quantify the birth performance of a population over a period of time. So birth performance of a population will tell us about the absolute numbers of population, will not tell you unless you know the denominator of the population for studying the fertility indicators. And once you know the denominator, you'll be able to compare the fertility trends of the different populations during a particular time interval. So this also exhibits a time trend in fertility in a population in a study of differential fertility by various socioeconomic, racial, and ethnic groups. So there are three important uses of fertility measures. First is quantification of birth performance. Second is comparing the fertility trends, and third is exhibiting the time trends in fertility in a population. The sources of data from where you can get the fertility indicators are, you can have the data from registration of vital events, sample registration systems, and repeated periodic national family health surveys 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that have been conducted over last 2 decades to compare on the data on the fertility trends and indicators. So if we look onto the higher reasons of higher fertility in India, again this is a very important slide because this question directly comes in your paper and they can ask you comment on the higher fertility reasons of higher fertility and fertility trends and patterns in the country. And here the reasons of common reasons of higher fertility in India are universality of marriage, less age at marriage, low level of literacy. So low level means women are not given equal chances to educate themselves, to be into job, to earn for themselves, and thus the only thing left for them is to get married and have children. So prove their fertility. Poor level of living, limited use of contraceptives. There are multiple reasons associated with poor use of contraceptives, which we can discuss sometime later. And other traditional ways of living and their standards are the reasons why their fertility rates are very high in our country. So we'll read about some indicators that are very important. First very important indicator we talk about is crude birth rate. We call it as crude birth rate, means it just tells us about how many people are born and in a over a total population, median population in a given year in a geographical area. So it is a very crude indicator. It is just how many people born over total population, which is not the adequate method, but it is easy to calculate, hence is most widely used indicator for fertility. So the formula for crude birth rate is total number of births divided by P is mid-year population in the year into 1000 is called as crude birth rate. So the merit is that it requires minimum data on fertility and is very easy to interpret. Let's say if I say that the crude birth rate of an area A is 12 per thousand and area B is 18 per thousand, you will always presume that area 1 will have a low birth rate as compared to area 2, and thereby that's a very clear and easy to interpret indicator. However, it's a very unsatisfactory indicator because the total population that is taken as the median population as a denominator is not exposed to childbearing. All men, all women, married, unmarried, fertile, infertile, everybody is not a part of the denominator, and thereby saying that 12 per lakh or per thousand population is an area with low indicator as compared to 18 in the other area is not the right way of interpreting the birth rates. So which is a better method? We talk about general fertility rate, which could be a better method to the crude birth rate. So general fertility rate means the number of live births in a year per 1000 women in the reproductive age group. So only women who are in the reproductive age group are going to contribute to the general fertility rate. So this is definitely a better indicator because we have excluded the men from the denominator and women who are not in the reproductive age group because they are not contributing towards the fertility of a population. So this is definitely merit is a better indicator than the crude birth rate because this here the denominator involves only those people who are exposed to the childbirth. However, the demerit is that all the women in the reproductive age group are not exposed to the risk of childbirth. They could be widows, there could be women who are not planning to have children. There are some women who are already protected by one or the other means of contraceptive. So then general fertility rate is also not the very specific indicator to study the fertility pattern of a population. So then which is a better method? Coming on to the general marital fertility rate. So only women who are married and in the reproductive age group are exposed to the risk factor of getting pregnant or having the family. So general marital fertility rates are the ones that are defined as number of live births per year per 1000 married women in the reproductive age group. So here 15 to 49 women married are at any or midpoint of the year are the part of the denominator. So other measures could be age specific marital fertility rate. So even in a married woman, the risk of pregnancy is more in the initial 7 to 10 years of marriage. So if the trends of marriage in a population are at a set at a higher age, let's say 25. So 25 to 35 would be the age specific fertility rate, which is more specific. If that is higher, that is comparable, and you compare it to the other population, you can be very sure of the higher fertility rates in a population because that would contribute, that particular population will contribute more towards the increasing population in an area or a community or a country or a village or a population. So more so if you talk about the total fertility trends, the total fertility rates are the average number of children which a woman will bear of a hypothetical cohort would bear during her lifetime if she were to bear children throughout her life at a age specific fertility rates for a given year, and if none of them dies before crossing the age of reproduction. So this total fertility rate TFR is very important, and we always try to measure the rates of most of the areas and countries through this indicator, total fertility rate, because it gives us an approximate magnitude of completed family size. And this is calculated by summing the age specific fertility rates for all ages. So let's see how we calculate the total fertility rate of a population. Here we see that the number of births for each age group of women in the numerator divided by the number of women in each age group, and we take a age group of 5 years, and we calculate the total fertility rate for 5 years. So 5-year rate with a cumulative age specific fertility rate for all the age groups, 15 to 19, then 20 to 24, then 24 to 29, and so on till the entire reproductive age group is achieved. So this is how we calculate. So this is a more specific method of measuring the fertility rates of a population. So in this, there are a few assumptions that might not be very true. So assuming that there is no net migration and unchanged mortality, a total fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman ensures broadly stable population. That is why we say that if the total fertility rate of a population is 2.1, we presume that broadly the population is stable. That means one woman giving rise to 2 children, and 0.1 stands for an abortion or a death or a stillbirth or any pregnancy wastage or losses. So this is the one of the better methods of studying the completed family size, and completed family size of 2.1 as the best fertility indicator to measure the uh, uh, when we talk about the comparison between the two states or two countries. Next is gross reproduction rate, where this is again gross means how a population is replaced. So it indicates the average number of daughters, because only daughters will contribute to the pool of women who will be contributing towards increasing in the family size and thereby the fertility of the population. So it indicates the average number of daughters of a hypothetical cohort of women by the end of reproductive life if she bears the births according to a given schedule of age specific fertility, taking only the female births without experiencing any mortality till the end of the reproductive life. And the limitation is that it does not consider the mortality of the cohort of women. However, this is again not very true. So better measure is NRR. Net means what is added minus what is subtracted, right? So NRR is GRR adjusted for mortality schedule of the cohort of women. So this NRR would be number of daughters that would be born to a cohort of women during their lifetime if they experience the current fixed schedule of age specific fertility rates and age specific mortality rates, and thereby NRR is a demographic indicator. So NRR1 means, this is a very common question which is asked in the exam, which is a long 20 marks question in the final exams. What do you understand by NRR1? NRR1 means net reproduction rate is 1. One woman is replaced by one daughter, and adjusted for the mortality schedule and age specific fertility schedule only. And this is a demographic indicator. If we have this pattern that every woman is being replaced by one daughter, we have achieved a replacement level of fertility, and thereby population stabilization has been achieved. So what are the factors affecting maternal health? And if you talk about maternal mortality ratio, what is a maternal death? Let's understand first of all. Maternal death is the death of a woman while she's pregnant or within 42 days of termination of pregnancy. And all maternal deaths, that is a woman who's pregnant, have either they die either due to direct obstetric causes or due to indirect obstetric causes. So the direct causes of maternal mortality are hemorrhage is the most common cause, 35%, followed by hypertension, sepsis, abortion, and 18% of the maternal deaths are contributed by indirect causes of maternal mortality and not by the direct pregnancy or obstetric related causes. So only 18% are indirect causes, whereas other causes are direct causes like hemorrhage, which includes antenatal and postpartum hemorrhage, anemia, hypertension, sepsis, and abortion. And this slide shows us that 30.5% of the maternal deaths, they occur before delivery, and rest other almost 70% of delivery deaths occur after the onset of labor. So almost 17% would occur on the day of delivery, 18% within first 7 days of delivery, 20%, more than 20% from the after the first week of delivery, and within 45 days you have the most of the delivery pregnancy related deaths that can occur within first 42 days. And thereby 42 days is a very crucial period of time when we talk about maternal mortality, and thereby this period is called as a puerperal period or period of puerperium, because this period is a specific period where we have to take care of the mother, or we have to provide her postpartum care or postnatal care to the mother and the baby, so that we can tackle or avoid the avoidable causes of the maternal deaths during first 42 days or during the puerperal period. So the three important factors, the three important delays which you need to understand in cases of maternal death is, first type of delay is delay when the woman is undergoing maternal complications and the family is not literate enough or educated enough to understand the problem, and thereby there's a delay in the decision to seek care. But this would occur when the family has a failure to recognize the complications and decision to seek the care. For example, the reasons, common reasons would be socio-cultural barriers to seeking care, decision-making abilities, beliefs and practices surrounding childbirth and delivery, and of course, low status of woman. Type 2 delay would be when the family knows that the mother needs care and she needs to be transported. However, the transportation is not possible. So accessibility in care or delay in reaching the care is the second type of delay which can lead to maternal mortality. And type 3 delay is once you have reached, the family is well aware that the mother needs care, the mother is able to reach the health facility, but the health facility is there's a delay in providing care to the woman once she reaches the institution. That is called as type 3 delay. So three types of delays in maternal mortality leading to maternal mortality is again a very important short note which you might find, which is a 5-marker question, and you have to understand and explain the three types of delays and reasons of three types of delays. So if there are any questions, we can have a few questions before we go ahead, and if there are none, then we'll go ahead with the under 5 health. Are there any questions? If there are any questions, I would like to take the questions before we go ahead. Arnav Khurana, Aditya, Shikhar. Are there any questions? You want to ask any questions? Ashray Gupta, Abhimanyu Mahala, Abhishek Rawat, Akanksha Agrawal. I can see so many names here, but no responses. Are you all attending, or you've just logged in and busy with your own schedule? Any questions? So you can, your Prakhar is saying we cannot speak, only type. So you can type your question. If there's any question, you can type it here. If there's nothing, then we'll go ahead. Are you all very clear on the fertility indicators? These are very important indicators, and you will surely have at least one question in your exam from this. So fine, then now no more questions. So we talk about under 5 health, and under 5 period is again a very important period because under 5 is the age when there is maximum growth and development of the baby. And the most important indicator that also defines about the socioeconomic growth of a population of a country is infant mortality rate, and it is the number of infant deaths given in a given year per 1,000 live births in the same year. So what is an infant? A child who's less than 365 days of age, and the number of any number of children dying who are less than 1 year of age divided by number of live births in the same age multiplied by 1,000 is called as infant mortality rate. So if you can see the estimated birth rate, death rate, natural growth rate, infant mortality rate as per 2018 in the bottom of the slide, which shows a table, you can see that the latest figures available for infant mortality rate total is 32 per 1,000 live births, whereas rural is 36 and urban is 23, which means the facilities for safe delivery, the facilities for infant care, essential newborn care are better with the urban areas as compared to rural areas, and thereby the infant mortality rates are less in the urban areas as compared to the rural areas. So this is a figure which shows that after the RCH program has been launched and revised with the new interventions towards prevention of infant mortality rates, we see that there has been a constant decline in the total infant mortality rate, significantly from 50 to 32. That is almost 18 points down the original figures in 2009 over 9 years. And even the improvement in the urban and rural areas had been remarkable, from 55 to 36 in the rural areas, whereas 23 from 34 in the urban areas. So this is an impact of the program, of the success of the program in terms of the infant mortality rates. So we can see that Kerala is the state where the infant mortality rate is lowest as per 2017 and 16 data, and Delhi has further shown lesser infant mortality rate in 2017, which is 16, followed by Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Punjab, and this is sample registration system data. So you can see that there has been a significant impact of the infant mortality on the infant mortality rate of the RMNCHA program. So what are the common medical causes of infant mortality? Neonatal mortality is the mortality of any newborn baby within 28 days of the birth. And post-neonatal mortality, we can split the infant mortality into two parts, neonatal mortality and post-neonatal mortality. And both the parts are very important because the reasons and the factors for the post-neonatal mortality and neonatal mortality are different, and thereby we need to understand the medical causes. Thereby only we can find the reasons and have an impact on by making the adequate interventions in both the age categories. So as the logic explains, the neonatal mortality would have a more impact of the antenatal factors of the woman and the delivery conditions, and post-neonatal mortality would be more due to the infectious diseases and the congenital anomalies or accidents in the babies. So medical causes of neonatal mortality would be low birth weight and prematurity, which is an impact of poor antenatal care, birth injury and difficult labor, sepsis, again poor delivery practices, congenital anomalies, hemolytic disease of newborn, conditions of placenta and cord. Diarrheal diseases, they are more common in postnatal mortality, but diarrheal diseases might occur if the baby has been given prelactal feed and the breastfeeding has not been commenced at the earliest. Acute respiratory tract infections and tetanus if the delivery practices are not up to the mark and hygienic delivery practices are not being used. So on the other hand, for the postnatal mortality, more common would be infections, specifically diarrheal diseases and acute respiratory infections. Other communicable diseases, malnutrition, because by the age of 6 months, the woman must wean the baby with the complementary food, and thereby if the complementary food is not given, then the malnutrition sets in the baby and thereby can lead to postneonatal mortality, congenital anomalies and accidents. So what are the factors that affect the infant mortality? One is the biological factors like the birth weight. So lower is the birth weight of the baby, higher is the possibility that the baby will be at a special risk. And the causes are poor nutrition, poor antenatal care during pregnancy. Age of the mother. IMR is usually higher when the mother is either very young or very old. The birth order. Highest mortality is found among first-born children and with the one and is lowest with the children who are born in the subsequent pregnancies and deliveries. The risk of infant mortality escalates even after the third birth. So children who are firstborn are highest mortality, and children after third birth order are also at a higher risk of death. Then birth spacing, repeated pregnancies leading to malnutrition in mothers. Anemia in mothers predisposes the babies to the low birth weight. If the baby is prematurely weaned or inadequately weaned, can lead to protein energy malnutrition, diarrhea, and dehydration. If children are born as a part of the multiple births, then children face a greater risk of death than those who are born singletons due to higher frequency of low birth weight babies when they are born as a part of multiple pregnancies. So what preventive and social measures you can take is good prenatal nutrition. That is the mother's nutrition should improve. Good antenatal care should be given with adequate iron folic acid supplementation. Prevention of infection, example neonatal tetanus. Protection against 6 vaccine preventable diseases through UIP, Universal Immunization Program, and breastfeeding, giving protection against gastrointestinal infections, respiratory infections, and protein energy malnutrition. Then prenatal care must be improved with a view to detect mothers with high risk factors, and those with prenatal conditions associated with high risk are hospitalized, kept under observation, and treated. Then there are special care baby units for children, the babies who are weighing less than 2 kgs, and proper referral services at every point should be available so as to take care of the mother and the baby in a specialized settings. So in India, what are the major causes of neonatal mortality? As we've seen in one of the slides: prematurity, asphyxia, birth injuries, sepsis, pneumonia, diarrhea, congenital malformations, and infections of the cord. So these are the common reasons of neonatal mortality. So once you know the reasons, you'll be able to prevent these reasons by giving the adequate intervention measures at the in these children. We've been talking about infant mortality rates. Now we talk about infant as child less than 1 year of age. But the child between 1 to 4 years is called as a child, and the death rate is called as child death rate. And this is defined as the number of deaths in the children between 1 to 4 years in a given year per 1,000 children at that particular year at the midpoint year of time. So this is a refined indicator because here it takes care of not only the maternal factors or the delivery factors or the healthcare factors, but the social and environmental factors also. So higher child death rate in a country reflects on the adverse environmental hazards. That is, when a child is already 1 year of age, that means the child has bypassed the factors, intrauterine factors, congenital factors, minor infections, and malnutrition. So now the child is more exposed to the environmental factors for succumbing to death. So adverse environmental factors, malnutrition, hygiene, infections and accidents, and other economic, cultural, and educational characteristics of the family that will have an impact on the bringing up process of the family, and thereby will lead to higher death rate in children 1 to 4 years of age. So the leading causes of death in children 1 to 4 years of age would be diarrhea, pneumonia, malnutrition. So you can see infections and malnutrition followed by accidents and injuries. So this is more of an environmental impact. If the environment is not clean, the sanitation is not there, water is not clean, hygienic practices are not being followed, there'll be higher infections, and infection malnutrition forming a vicious cycle will lead to deaths due to the infection and malnutrition. So what programmatic interventions have been made for handling the infant mortality and child deaths under RNCHA program? So up till now, if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead with it. Are there any questions till here? So if there are no more questions, then we go ahead with the HBNC scheme. So home-based newborn care scheme was launched in 2011, and this scheme aims to provide immediate postnatal care in cases of home delivery and essential newborn care to all the newborns up to the age of 42 days. So here the frontline workers or the ASHAs are incentivized. Okay, Mahika says that there are no questions. So we go ahead. So in this, under HBNC or home-based newborn care scheme, the frontline workers or ASHAs are trained and incentivized to provide special care to preterm and newborn babies. They are also trained in identification of illnesses, appropriate care, and referral through home visits. In the same way, the newborns are discharged who are discharged from the special newborn SNCUs or special newborn care units. They have to be followed up by these frontline workers at home. So this is a part of HBNC scheme. There is a facility-based newborn care scheme where the level-specific care has been envisaged, and the newborn care corners are being established at all the delivery points where the deliveries are being conducted, followed by NBSUs or newborn stabilization units at the CHCs or the first referral units. These are the first level of care that are the indoor facilities. These are 4-bedded units providing basic level of sick newborn care. And higher than this is specialized newborn care units, SNCUs, that have been established at the district hospitals and tertiary care hospitals for advanced care to sick newborns. So the goal under the RMNCHA program is to have one SNCU or sick newborn care unit in each district of the country. So this is about the HBNC and facility-based newborn care to decrease the newborn deaths or neonatal deaths or infant mortality rates. Then there is the Navjat Shishu Suraksha Karikram. Here the providers are trained in basic newborn care and resuscitation through the saturation of all delivery points where the skilled birth attendants and NSSK trained personnel and functionalized newborn care corners are given the topmost priority under the national program under the RMNCHA program. Then is managing anemia in children. So there has been a policy decision to provide bi-weekly iron folic acid supplementation for preschool children of 6 months to 5 years as a part of National Iron Plus Initiative. All the children between 6 months to 5 years, they receive iron and folic acid tablets or syrup for 100 days in a year as a preventive measure for prevention of anemia. The ASHAs are incentivized for the home visits, and they are mandated to provide at least 1 dose per week under direct observation. Deworming is done every 6 months using albendazole syrup or tablet. And to simplify administration of deworming tablets, this intervention has been combined with vitamin A supplementation with biennial rounds. Managing severe acute malnutrition or SAM, the focus is mainly through facility-based care. The NRCCs are established over the subdivisional level or at the district level to take care of the children who are facility-based for severe acute malnutrition in these facilities. Subsequently, these children are referred to the Anganwadis for community-based programs after they have been managed acutely at the facilities and the baby starts gaining the weight. So it's a comprehensive strategy which includes promotion of optimal IYCF practices, growth monitoring and promotion, care of children with severe acute malnutrition in community care centers, and in the facility-based care centers for complicated cases. And this is implemented in partnership with ICDS through the Ministry of Women and Child Development. So the NRCCs that have been set up at the subdivisional level to decrease the risk of mortality in children with severe acute malnutrition. So the tribal areas and the high focus districts are prioritized for setting up of these units, and these are linked to the community based programs with ICDS for identification and referral of severely malnourished children. Again, there's another scheme called as Child Health Screening and Early Intervention Services, which is also known as Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram. This is a health screening scheme which is to detect the 4Ds: defects, deficiencies, diseases, and developmental delays, including disabilities. And this scheme is to detect the medical conditions at an early stage, thus enabling early intervention and management, ultimately leading to reduction in mortality, morbidity, and lifelong disability in age group 0 to 18 years. So here the teams include at least 2 MBBS or Ayush doctors or 2 paramedics who will be adequately trained and provide necessary tools for screening. And the arrangements are made to for the free management of these children at the district early intervention centers or at the identified tertiary care level facilities. So coming on to eradication efforts towards poliomyelitis, we all know that the last case of wild polio was reported from India in 2011 from Howrah district of West Bengal. That was 13th January. And on 27th March 2014, as per the protocol, 3 years later, WHO declared India as a polio-free country since no new cases of wild polio virus were being reported over the last 5 years. So in September 2015, WHO had declared type 2 polio fully eradicated. On the WHO's advice, India phased out the type 2 virus from its oral vaccine in April 2016 to ensure that threat of vaccine developed polio was mitigated. So global switch for type 2 antigen was celebrated across the globe between 17th April to 1st May 2016, and India it was 25th April 2016 when type 2 antigen was removed from the oral polio vaccine, and we switched over from trivalent oral polio vaccine to bivalent oral polio vaccine. So the strategies that were used for eradication were strengthening the routine immunization, high coverage with routine oral polio vaccine, mass immunizations through national immunization days and special sub-national immunization days. Enhanced surveillance and case investigation was done for all the cases of acute flaccid paralysis less than 15 years of age. All the cases who reported with acute flaccid paralysis were investigated within 48 hours clinically, and 2 stool samples were collected at a duration gap between 24 to 48 hours. PHC's weekly report was nil. Reporting was also important. The PHCs were to weekly report the acute flaccid paralysis, and non-polio AFP rate was used as a proxy indicator for surveillance of the AFP acute flaccid paralysis cases. So environmental surveillance was also being done. Then the mop-ups in the areas where 1 or 2 cases were reported was done as per the policy. So polio endgame strategy was planned between 2019 to 23 with the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, where the first goal was eradication and interruption of transmission of all wild polio viruses, stop all circulating VDPVs outbreaks within 120 days of detection, and eliminate the risk of emergence of future vaccine-derived polio viruses. The second goal was integration to contribute towards strengthening of immunization and healthcare systems to help active and sustain polio eradication, ensure sensitive polio virus surveillance through integration with comprehensive vaccine preventable diseases and communicable disease surveillance systems, and prepare for and respond to future outbreaks and emergencies. And goal 3 was certification and containment. Wherever the wild polio virus was eliminated or eradicated, and contain all the polio viruses and interrupt the transmission. So if we see that there were 3 major goals of polio eradication initiative. First was eradication of the wild polio virus itself. So wild polio virus eradicated with vaccine derived polio virus circulating stopped. Then integration of the routine immunization and health system strengthening into polio eradication, ensure good surveillance and response to the future outbreaks and emergencies, and certification and containment. So there were few newer initiatives that were taken up in the RMNCHA program for adolescents. It was a Rashtriya Kishore Swasthya Karyakram that was launched in 2014 on January 7th at the community level to create awareness about the nutrition education sessions through already existing platforms for adolescents. Nutritional counseling to be provided to the women, specifically in the Sabla districts where Sabla scheme was already on. The nutrition component was linked to the Sakshar Bharat Abhiyan through school curricula and through the Ministry of Women and Child Development and Ministry of HRD for supplementary nutrition, fortification and nutrition assessment. So the children who were adolescents were screened for lower body mass index, they were being screened, referred and managed at the higher levels. So there was an Iron Plus initiative for adolescents also, as I told you, in the child health. So this was weekly iron folic acid supplementation scheme, which was also known as WIPS. That was where the iron deficiency anemia amongst adolescent boys and girls in both urban and rural area was being addressed through the Anganwadis and through the schools wherever the children were school going. So the key features was supervised administration of iron folic acid weekly, 100 milligram elemental iron with 500 microgram folic acid, screening of children for moderate and severe anemia and referral to an appropriate health facility for management, biannual deworming, and behavior change, both in terms of dietary habits and compliance with the iron supplementation and intake of iron. Then the adolescent friendly health services were set up at the sub-center and were run by the ANMs at the sub-center level, at the PHC by the medical officer and ANM on weekly basis. And community health centers had a dedicated counselor where adolescent health clinics were being run on a daily basis. So most of the places peer education approach was used under the program, where the peer educators were selected, trained and mentored by the teachers to provide information on common health problems and common health concerns in these age groups. So life skills education, both through the educational institutions and community settings, was given to create awareness and skill building to counter pressure to experiment with addictions such as tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. Promotion of menstrual hygiene to ensure adequate knowledge and information about the use of sanitary napkins amongst the adolescent girls. The sanitary napkins were provided under NRHM brand free days, and these napkins were being sold to adolescent girls by the ashas and at a very minimal cost, and they were also trained how to dispose of these napkins. So the vending machines and the disposal machines were also being installed in the various primary health facilities for the needful. Use of folic acid in periconception period was facility based by the service providers, and ashas were also roped into the scheme. Pregnancy testing kits Nishchay were supplied to all the sub-centers and through the ashas. Mother and child tracking schemes system to ensure the mechanism that enables service providers to follow up women and program managers to monitor service delivery. On the demand generation side, this was about the service delivery side. On the demand generation side, for skilled obstetric care, Janani Suraksha Yojana was launched, and Janani Shishu Suraksha Karyakram was to reduce the out-of-pocket expenses related to maternal and newborn care. So in Janani Suraksha Yojana, there were some cash incentives or benefits being given to the women so that they just to ensure that the women would go for an institutional delivery, and the ashas who would support the women for institutional delivery, do the birth micro planning, take them for delivery, were also given certain kind of financial supplementation or financial motivation. Then was community-based doorstep distribution of contraceptives by the ASHA workers, where nominal amount of ₹1 for a pack of 3 condoms and 1 cycle of OCP, an emergency contraceptive, was being provided by the ASHAs. Then, as I said, that spacing methods, contraceptive methods were also being provided through the RMNCHA program, where IUCD 380A with an in situ life of 10 years was being provided through fixed day services in the primary health care system. Postpartum IUCD insertion and sterilization. So the gynecologists and the medical officers were trained to provide postpartum IUCDs, and postpartum IUCD was being promoted, and the insertion at district and sub-district hospital level was made sure to cater to the women who were reporting for the delivery to these facilities, considering a high institutional delivery load at these facilities. Training of medical officers not only in postpartum IUCD insertion but also in main lab procedure for the permanent sterilization. So there were other interventions like sterilization services on fixed days, non-scalpel vasectomy, mini lab tubectomy, comprehensive MTP services at all the delivery points, medical abortion drugs through mifepristone and misoprostol, and ethagridine lactate up till 20 weeks to be included in the essential drug list, and multiple public-private partnerships for capacity building for outsource and better response to the program. Then management of RTI and STI, availability of training and training of color-coded kits for syndromic management of RTI, STI, rapid testing kits for syphilis and whole blood fingerprint prick testing for HIV, and convergence with NACO for case management, lab services, HIV counseling, and antiretroviral drugs, equipment, and blood safety. So these were the newer initiatives under RMCHA program. If you have any questions, you can ask me. If there are no questions, any questions if there are? So if there are no more questions, thank you very much. We'll have the next class on Thursday, and by that time, please read and come so that if you have any questions, we can take them up in the next class. Thank you very much.